I've been holding my breath for so long, waiting for a word from you. I've gone to bed with a prayer on my lips and woken up with the same silence in the air. This isn't the first time I've been in a trial, but it's the first time I've felt this alone. I thought I was strong enough to face the storms of life, the financial pressures, the fractured relationships, the crippling anxiety. But I can't face your silence. It's a different kind of darkness, a deeper, more profound kind of pain. It's the kind of ache that whispers to me in the middle of the night, asking the question I am terrified to answer. Is he still there? Because in the quiet of my own heart, it feels like he's gone. I don't know how much longer I can keep praying into this emptiness, this vast and echoing void. The answer I need seems so far away, and the God who promised to be a refuge seems to have become a distant echo. I was so sure of the promise. I had read it, written it down, and held it to my heart like a lifeline. It was a promise of healing, of provision, of a breakthrough that I was so certain would come. I had a picture in my mind of how it would happen, a clear, beautiful cinematic scene of God reaching down and changing everything in an instant. I prayed with a faith that felt like a rock, an unwavering trust that no matter how dark the night, the morning would bring my miracle. My prayer wasn't just a request, it was a conversation, a confident proclamation. I told God, I know you. We'll do this. I'm not just asking, I'm waiting. My hope is in you. And for a while, that hope was enough. It was a flickering candle in a dark room, a tiny flame of conviction that kept the shadows at bay. The days passed, then the weeks, and the flicker began to waver. I'd check my phone every morning, every afternoon, waiting for that one text, that one email, that one phone call that would signal the end of the wait. But the notifications never came. I'd wake up with the same aching body, the same heavy burden, the same questions swirling in my mind. The faith I had so proudly proclaimed began to feel like a fragile illusion, a beautiful lie I had told myself to get through the night. The stories of others, the testimonies of friends who spoke of sudden breakthroughs, began to feel like a personal condemnation. Why them and not me? Was my faith not as strong as I thought? Was my sin too great? Was there something I had done, a mistake I had made, that had caused God to turn away and leave me stranded in this wilderness of waiting? The pain of the original problem was still there, but it was nothing compared to the new, deeper wound. The wound of a love that felt unrequited. The ache of a conversation that had become a monologue. It was the feeling of being in a house, whispering to the person you love and getting no reply. Was he even in the room? I began to search for him in the noise of my own anxiety, in the echo of my own tears. But there was no answer. The silence had become a physical weight, a thick blanket of unresponsiveness that suffocated my hope and hardened my heart. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to finally get some kind of reaction, even if it was a negative one. Anything would be better than this suffocating emptiness. I felt like a child who had cried themselves to sleep, only to wake up still alone, still holding the broken pieces of a life that felt like it would never be whole again. The promises in the Bible, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cruel irony. The verses about God being a faithful shepherd, a mighty fortress, a God who never fails, felt like beautiful words written for someone else's story. I would lie awake at night, tracing the words of a psalm about God hearing the cries of the afflicted, and I would feel a hollow ache in my chest. The Bible says he listens, I would whisper into the pillow, the silent tears soaking the fabric. So why does it feel like he has hidden from me? The faith I had clung to, the hope I had nursed, was no longer enough. I was at the end of my rope, standing on the edge of a cliff, and the only thing I could feel was the wind of my own desperation. The journey, once a path of surrender, had become a prison of waiting, a quiet, lonely cell with nothing but the echoing silence and the ache of a heart that was tired of hoping. I was standing on the precipice of a decision I never thought I would have to make, to finally, truly, let go of the last shred of faith I had. I was done praying. I was done hoping. I was just tired. The loneliness was so strong that I thought, maybe God has grown tired of me. Maybe my prayers have become a tiresome refrain, a monotonous song that he's simply tuned out. I've heard the verses, the beautiful, comforting words that say, he knows the number of hairs on my head and that he holds me in the palm of his hand. But those words began to feel like whispers from a distant land, a land I had once visited but could no longer find on a map. I would sit with my Bible open, tracing the words of a psalm about God hearing the cries of the afflicted, and I would feel a hollow ache in my chest. The Bible says he listens, I would whisper to the empty room. So why does it feel like he has hidden from me? The silence was no longer passive. It felt active, intentional. It felt like a deliberate turning away. I started to get angry, not in a shouting, fiery way, but in a quiet, simmering resentment that poisoned every thought. My prayers, once filled with supplication, began to change. They became bitter, demanding questions. Where are you? Why is this still happening? What am I doing wrong? I was a child shaking a gift-wrapped box, desperate to know what was inside, and getting no response but the rattling of my own desperation. I cried out. I screamed into the pillow, the silent tears soaking the fabric, and the only reply was the thud of my own heart against the floor. The sky remained utterly, completely silent. I felt like I was being tested, not by a loving father, but by a merciless, distant deity who delighted in my anguish. I would look at the people around me, at their seemingly perfect lives and their Instagram posts about answered prayers, and a sharp, cruel envy would slice through me. Did they have a secret password I didn't know? Were they somehow more worthy? I started to bargain with God, a dangerous and desperate game. Okay, God, if you do this, I promise I will. I will serve you better. I will read my Bible every single day. I will give more. Just do this one thing. It was the prayer of a broken man, a hollow-eyed figure in the dark, trying to trade his obedience for a promise that seemed to have been forgotten. And in the silence that followed, I felt an even deeper emptiness. The promises were not being fulfilled. The pain was still there. And my soul, once a garden, was now a desert. I was a man wandering in the heat, seeing mirages of water that shimmered on the horizon but vanished when I got close. The promises of God felt like those mirages. Beautiful, tantalizing, but ultimately not real. The nights became my most feared enemy. They were the times when the silence was at its loudest. The memories of a different life, a life without this pain, would flood back. The ghost of a person I used to be, a person with a solid, unwavering faith. I would remember the sermons that spoke of God's perfect timing, and the irony of it would be a bitter taste in my mouth. What was perfect about this? What was so good about a slow, agonizing death of hope? This was not the story I had signed up for. This was not the journey I had so bravely surrendered to. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to finally get some kind of reaction. Even a rebuke would be better than this suffocating silence. A part of me thought, if I just do something big enough, something bad enough, maybe he will finally speak. Maybe he will finally show up. But the other part of me, the small, bruised, and barely breathing part, held on. It was not a grand or confident faith. It was a microscopic, desperate faith. It was the faith of a drowning man holding on to a single, thin thread. I wasn't even sure what I was holding on to anymore. Was it a promise? A memory? Or just the sheer inability to completely let go? And in one of those darkest nights, when the emptiness felt like a physical weight on my chest, a small, almost imperceptible thing happened. I was standing by the window, staring out at the inky blackness. and a single tiny light flickered on in the house across the street. Just for a second. It wasn't a sign. It wasn't a miracle. But for a fleeting moment, I felt a gentle breath of something that was not despair. A whisper in the wilderness. It was a single fragile thought that floated through the storm. What if the story isn't over yet? And in that microsecond of stillness, a small sliver of light began to break through the impenetrable darkness. It was enough to stop me from letting go. It was a tiny crack in the stone wall, the faintest flicker of hope that prepared my heart for the next part of the story, the one I had not yet seen. It wasn't a thunderous voice from the clouds. It wasn't a burning bush. It wasn't even a grand, sweeping feeling of peace. It was something far more subtle. It was the sound of the silence itself. In my worst moments, the silence had felt like a weapon, a cold and indifferent barrier. But as I began to stop screaming and just listen, I started to feel a shift. It was as if the silence was not the absence of something, but the presence of something else entirely. It was in the dead of the night, when I would sit with my knees pulled to my chest, that I would begin to feel it. A quiet, soft presence, not of an answer, but of a companion. The loneliness began to feel a little less lonely. I would stare at the black window, and the emptiness I had once seen, there was replaced by a kind of vast, peaceful stillness. And I began to wonder, what if God's silence is not a punishment, but a sacred space? I started to read the Bible differently, not as a book of magical formulas for miracles, but as a collection of stories about people who waited just like me. I read about Joseph, sitting in a dark prison, a forgotten promise, his only companion. I read about David, fleeing from Saul, hiding in caves and writing desperate songs. I read about the disciples in the upper room, waiting, with no idea what was coming next. And in those pages, I didn't find the answers I was looking for. I found something more profound. I found myself. I found a companionship in their suffering, a shared knowledge that some of God's most powerful work happens in the quiet, in the unseen, in the places where hope has been stretched to its very breaking point. And it was there, in a quiet moment of reflection, that a single verse came to mind, a verse I had read 100 times before. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. For the first time, it didn't feel like a platitude. It felt like a direct word, a whisper just for me. It was not about a miracle from my pain, but a miracle in my pain. It was a gentle invitation to stop looking for the grand, impossible miracle and to start seeing the divine presence in the mundane, in the everyday. And as I started to look, I began to see the small things that I had taken for granted. The way the sun filtered through the trees in the morning, making the world feel brand new. The unexpected call from a friend who said, I just felt like I should call you. I'm thinking of you. The way a single song on the radio would bring a sudden, unexplainable feeling of comfort to my chest. They weren't answers, they weren't solutions, but they were something far more beautiful. They were breadcrumbs. They were subtle, gentle reminders that I was not alone, that even though I couldn't see him, he was there. I began to realize that sometimes God's silence is the sound of something being healed within us. He was not ignoring me. He was working on a deeper level. He was mending the brokenness of my soul, the fear and the anxiety and the bitterness that had taken root, the things that words could not reach. He was restoring me from the inside out, preparing me for a future I could not see, a future that required a heart more whole than the one I had started with. This new revelation wasn't a sudden burst of joy. It was a slow, quiet dawn. It was the feeling of warmth returning to my cold hands. The memory of a promise, long forgotten, surfaced in my mind. Not the promise of the specific miracle I had been praying for, but a deeper, more fundamental promise, the promise of His presence. I will never leave you nor forsake you. It wasn't a promise of an easy life, but of a constant companionship in a difficult one. It was in my worst moment that he was closest, not with a solution, but with a quiet, loving presence. He didn't speak a word, but his silence was a comfort. It was a testament to a love that was not transactional, but unconditional. A love that didn't require me to be fixed before he would draw near. I began to see that my miracle wasn't the one I had been praying for, the one I had been demanding. My miracle was the fact that I was still standing, that my faith, though fragmented, had not been completely shattered, that I was still capable of seeing beauty in a world that had felt so cold. The desert was not empty. He had been there all along. And the silence I had so deeply feared was, in fact, the gentle, healing sound of a loving God, meticulously and patiently putting me back together. The final turning point came not with a grand answer, but with a silent, profound understanding. I finally grasped the truth. His silence was not a punishment, but a process. The desert wasn't an abandonment. It was a place of encounter. I realized he hadn't just been waiting for my faith to get stronger. He was nurturing it, protecting it. The absence I had so bitterly mourned was, in fact, a shield. I had wanted the answer, the miracle, so badly that I couldn't see the danger that a quick answer might have posed. I couldn't see the parts of me that needed to be purified, the anxieties that needed to be surrendered, the soul sickness that needed to be healed before the blessing could be truly received. The silence was him, holding me back from a premature answer, from a road that would have led to a different kind of brokenness. The silence was his love, in its purest, most protective form. This was my greatest miracle, not the healing of my body, not the mending of my relationships, but the healing of my heart, the restoration of my faith. He didn't answer the specific prayer I had for a moment because he was answering the one I hadn't known how to pray. The prayer for a deep, unshakable trust in him, even when the world makes no sense. The prayer for a soul-deep peace that transcends circumstance. The prayer for a new kind of miracle, the one that happens not to us, but within us. He was teaching me to love him for who he is, not just for what he can do for me. He was teaching me that his presence is the greatest miracle of all, and the realization was like a great cleansing wave that washed over my soul, bringing tears not of pain, but of a profound and overwhelming gratitude. I got on my knees again, but this time the prayer was different. There were no demands, no questions, just a raw, tearful confession. I'm not the same person who started this journey on a cold bedroom floor. I am bruised, but I am not broken. I am weary, but I am not without hope. You have shown me a secret. I never knew that the greatest miracles are not the ones that change our circumstances, but the ones that change us. I am learning to find you not in the parting of the seas, but in the quiet of the morning. I am learning to hear your voice, not in a thunderous cry, but in the gentle silence of my soul. And in that moment of profound truth, I realized there was only one verse I truly needed to hear. Not the promises of instant miracles, not the verses about mountains moving, but one quiet, powerful, life-changing word. I realized that the true answer, the secret to surviving the silence, was never a word of thunder, but a word of hope whispered in the quiet. It was the promise that he is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. The most powerful act of faith is simply to wait quietly for his salvation. This one single truth was enough. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul who seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. Lamentations 3:25-26. That's all it ever was. Not a demand, not a plea, but a beautiful, patient invitation to trust in the silence. Because his silence is not absence. It is an active, loving, protective presence. It is a sacred space where the deepest healing happens. If God is silent, maybe it's because he is healing something that words cannot reach. If this message spoke to the secret part of your heart, the part that's been praying in silence, if you felt seen and known in this story, then I want to ask you something. In the comments below, share a whisper with God. Tell him, God, meet me in this silence. Or write, even though it hurts, I believe. Or simply say, Jesus, don't let go of my hand. Your word of faith, whispered in the comments, can be a beacon of hope for someone else walking in the dark. And if this video was a breath of life for you today, subscribe to our channel. Because every new video here is a whisper of God, a message, crafted with love to find you right where you are. It might be the answer your soul is waiting for. If you know someone who is struggling, someone who is praying in the quiet of their room, send them this video. It might be the gentle, loving presence they need most.